Today I want to talk about the signs that led to our two girls being diagnosed with autism. We have a 2-year-old who is diagnosed at 18 months with autism, and we have an 8-year-old who was diagnosed when she was 3 with autism. I want to start with the disclaimer. If you know one person who's on the autism spectrum, you know one person on the autism spectrum. Every person on the spectrum is different. I think what I've been realizing lately is more and more I've come to realize how much that applies to our girls. I think that I expected Tessie, our 2-year-old, to be more like Maggie. Even though I know that every person is different, I expected Tessie to maybe follow along in the trajectory that Maggie was on in more ways than she has. As Tessie's getting older and older, it's definitely becoming clear that she is her own little person with her own little personality. And while she and her sister have a lot in common, she and her sister are also very different. It's kind of amazing to watch them and watch their interactions because they're really close. Maggie absolutely adores Tessie. Tessie is one of her favorite people. They'll go often play together a lot, and so it's really interesting to watch their interactions. It's also really neat as their mom to see all the ways in which they're different. I would say that definitely goes for the signs of autism. They have a lot of things that were definitely in common that were signs that would later lead to their diagnoses. At the same time, I'm still kind of amazed how different they are. So I'm going to start with Maggie. What we saw with Maggie that led to her being diagnosed when she was 3. And I'll totally admit, if I knew anything about autism, she should have been diagnosed much earlier, but I didn't know anything at all. One of the things about Maggie was that while she definitely avoided eye contact with strangers, which we would notice later on, she definitely didn't avoid eye contact with me or her dad. She definitely used eye contact very significantly to get what she wanted. Like, she would come up and grab our faces and look us in the face. And so in that way, eye contact was not even vaguely a concern of mine with her at all. And it hadn't been when she was a baby either. I felt like she was looking at my face and I felt like she was making good eye contact. And even now, she still will. I mean, if she wants to communicate with me, she comes up to me and she makes eye contact. And I know that right away when they started doing testing, she didn't have eye contact. She wouldn't make eye contact with anyone, and she wouldn't respond to her name. She never responded to her name. So that was definitely one of the things that the girls have in common, and that was definitely a sign. But eye contact wasn't something that I noticed at all with Maggie. The things that I noticed would have been, number one, her lack of language. She did have some words, and I've talked about it before. They were mostly little 2-word phrases like good girl or meal bear, which was oatmeal bear, the name of her little teddy bear that she hauled around everywhere. Come on. She used come on for everything. Come on was like hurry up, go, let's do this. When I was like making dinner, if she was hungry, she'd stand there saying come on, come on. If I wasn't getting her dressed fast enough, she would say come on, come on. Come on was everything that she wanted. So she did have some words at 3, just it was like 10, probably 10 words, and they were all 5 2-word phrases that she used appropriately. But I mean, 10 words at 3 is not a lot of words. She did have some gross motor skill issues, but it wasn't that her gross motor skills were bad, because if she was careful, she could do, her gross motor skills were above her age level. She never scored badly on gross motor skills because she could go and she could climb to the top of something really high. It was scary. I have pictures of her like scaling the side of our house. She was constantly into things. She was constantly climbing things. She was definitely very sensory seeking, vestibular proprioceptive sensory seeking. She was fearless. She was climbing up slides and roller skates when she had roller skates on, and I'd turn around and she'd like be on a slide at the top of the slide, standing there with her roller skates like about to go down it, and turn around and she'd be on top of the table and she'd move to the trampoline under it, and she's in her roller skates about to jump off the table onto the trampoline. She was really, really good on her roller skates too. I mean, she could just skate everywhere in these skates. So her gross motor skills, when she was consciously thinking about what she was doing, was really, really good. At the same time, if she wasn't thinking about what she was doing, if she was just like walking across a room, that's when she would like be bumping into things and falling down. So it was when she wasn't being careful, her gross motor skills were, that was where her OTs would be like, she's like the kid that'll just fall down randomly in the middle of the room, or like just walk into things and not notice. And Tessie's like that. Actually, all 3 of the girls are like that, in that they're more likely to trip like in an open space when they're not being careful than when they're actually thinking about it. And Maggie's fine motor skills, I think in the beginning they were delayed, or at least they tested as delayed just because of probably the limits of the test. But I mean, one of the things we would see with Maggie was she would be asked to do a puzzle and she wouldn't want to do the puzzle, and then you would bring, it would be like, you know, an insert puzzle that has the little pieces with the little stubs on them that you put in, and then you would bring in like a 24 or 48 piece puzzle and she would do that super quick. Or like one of her things at therapy was they had these 4 puzzles together in a box that were different colors on the back, and she liked to dump all 4 puzzles together and do them at the same time. For Maggie, I think a lot of the times it was about the challenge of doing things that were a little bit harder, and if they weren't hard enough, she would just not do them. She would just not. And I think that's a lot of the story of Maggie's life. Maggie's stims were mostly vocal stims. She would make just vocalizations that she liked the sound and the feel of. She didn't flap. She didn't rock. None of the really stereotypical things that you would hear about that are associated with autism. One of them was like she would hold my hand when she was little to fall asleep, and she would just like pat my hand over and over and over again till my hand felt like it was gonna fall off, because she could do it for hours and hours and not fall asleep. Kind of like Tessie does with her mermaid pillow, but with my hand. Other than the vocal stims, none of her stims were really big or obvious. And then probably the biggest thing was the running off. The no sense of danger, no sense of needing to stay near her family or of being away from us. Just as soon as we were outside, she would run, and she had no sense of cars or the road or the street or stopping for cross streets. And at that point we lived in the city still, and it was scary, and I could not let go of her or she would just be gone. That and the starting to be able to open doors and windows and get out of things. That was scary. At that point it wasn't windows yet, but doors. So those were probably the main things when she was diagnosed. I mean, I'm sure, and carrying small things. She liked to carry small red things around in her hand. She didn't really play with them. I wouldn't say she entirely lacked imaginative play, because if you gave her something like a toy plane, she might sit on the table and take the toy plane and hold it below her and look at it down below her. Or like when we gave her a mermaid tail when she was 3, she definitely put that thing on and pretended to be a mermaid. When you gave her a princess dress, she put a crown on her head and would twirl around with her sister. So I don't think that she completely lacked imaginative play, because she would dress up and giggle and run around and laugh. It just wasn't the same level of what would be expected of a neurotypical kid at 3. And she definitely wasn't taking little toys and playing with them and like taking cars and, driving them around or anything like that. She had we got pumpkins, we got all these little pumpkins, and she lined them up. She wasn't really into lining things up, but occasionally I'd come downstairs and find a bunch of things lined up. And probably the other major thing was definitely the inadvertently, not really on purpose, breaking everything. She was just so strong and so persistent and so into exploring things that so many things in our house were broken. It was not really maliciously, it was just she would break things, and that was kind of hard on everybody. So with Maggie, those were the signs. The biggest thing was just probably the language, and I don't think I have put into words adequately. Her frustration level by the time she was 3 was very high. She was very frustrated. She wanted to communicate with us, and that communication piece wasn't there no matter what we did. It got better, but she was very, very frustrated by the time that we got that diagnosis. And we were seeing some things like teeth grinding and stuff like that was just, she was frustrated. I'd say the other big thing with her would just have been like constant movement and unusually low pain tolerance. She was constantly moving, constantly running all over the place, hyperactive. And the other thing was that she didn't react normally to pain. We had kind of joked that does she not feel pain? And we didn't really think it was true, but over and over again things would happen that appeared to be things that should hurt a lot, and then instead of reacting appropriately, like crying like you'd expect a 3-year-old to, she would laugh hysterically. One of them was that we were at the park and a kid was swinging, and I put her down out of the swing, and I turned around to pick Patrick up out of the swing, and she took off running. Patrick was like a pretty little baby. He was big enough to be in a swing, but he wasn't big. And I turned around to catch her, and I missed grabbing onto her, and she took off, and the other mom gave the kid, a bigger kid, like a big push and slammed into Maggie, and she got thrown far when the big kid hit her. I thought it looked like the sort of thing where I was going to be taking her to the hospital or something. It looked like she got hurt badly, and instead she just bounced up and started laughing hysterically and couldn't stop giggling. I think now, knowing her and knowing her pain tolerance and her not necessarily typical reactions to pain, I might have taken her to the hospital to get checked out because yeah, I guess we were just lucky that she was okay, because she was thrown halfway across the playground and it was really scary. But at the time, I thought, she's laughing. She can't really be hurt. She's laughing. I mean, we must have just been very, very lucky. So those were probably the main signs that I saw with Maggie. And I know there were more than that because when I started reading about autism and then I wrote down the things that struck me as I was reading about it, like the first night after I spoke to the doctor before I went in for the first meeting for her diagnosis, and I had like a full notebook page full of tiny writing of all of the things that matched what I'd read about, and it was like a list. So I know there were a ton of more things. But those are the things at the top of the list of the things that were the most obvious about her when she was a little kid. And then Tessie came along 6 years and 3 kids later after the 2 boys. Tessie, I was pretty confident had autism from the day that she was born. I know I've said that a lot of times, but I remember being in the hospital and it was all I could think about in the hospital for the 3 days after she was born, probably from like the second day. It was around the second day that I was really starting to think that Tessie was on the autism spectrum too. I've kept thinking of how hard it was for Maggie when Maggie was a toddler, when she was so frustrated, and all I could think was, how could I make it easier for this baby, that we had to get her diagnosed earlier, that I couldn't just wait around. That's why I worked so hard to get Tessie a diagnosis earlier. The signs that I saw with Tessie were probably not signs that most people are going to see that early. The earliest diagnosis that we could get was 18 months. So me seeing these things when she was a few days old weren't very helpful. They were probably just adding to stress. But they were also what I was seeing. And what I was seeing with Tessie was that by the time she was 2 days old, when I was nursing her, she would nurse, but as soon as she was done nursing, she would start to cry. And she would start to cry even if I burped her, changed her. And then when I put her down, she would be quiet. And if I picked her up and I tried to hold her, I tried to like put her on my chest, I tried to cuddle her, she would start to cry again. And as soon as I put her down into her bassinet in the hospital room, she would be totally quiet and she would just sleep and sleep and sleep. And after 3 hours, 4 hours, I would wake her up to feed her. And I would have to wake her up to feed her, and I would make her eat, and I would really, really have to work to keep her awake. Then she would start to fuss again and cry because I was holding her, and then she would cry, basically fuss, cry, be unhappy, until I put her back down because she didn't like me touching her, and that was pretty clear right away. And as soon as she was back down in her bassinet, she was this quiet, happy baby again. And that was probably the first 6 months of her life. And that was all she did was sleep. She came home from the hospital when she was 4 days old. When she was 3 weeks old, I noticed that I would be trying to make eye contact with her while she was nursing. And I knew that not all babies would make eye contact that early, but I also noticed that like if I put her up so that she was at eye level, so that I was looking into her eyes, she would look away. And if I looked at her while I was cradling her like this, she would avert her eyes and look everywhere but at my face. She never wanted to look at my face. If I had her on the bed and I was like playing peekaboo with her, she would move her eyes away from my face all the time, constantly. So I knew that babies don't always make eye contact by 3 weeks old. I also knew that it was a little bit weird that she was consciously averting her eyes from looking at me all the time. And so I was pretty sure by then that my worries in the hospital were confirmed, and I said it in one of Maggie's meetings with all of Maggie's people. We had like a care meeting with all of her people, and everyone was like, and I was wearing Tessie in like a Moby wrap, and everyone was like, there's no way you can know. You can't know when she's that tiny. I mean, everyone was really, really respectful and stuff, and they were just trying to reassure me, but I just did know. And I was completely certain of what I was seeing. Like at that point, there was just no doubts in my mind of what I was seeing. At 3 months, they tested her for early on, and she like really, really, really qualified. She wasn't tracking anything. She wasn't tracking toys. She didn't react at all to sound. So they sent her to an audiology appointment where they said that her ears were fine. She was totally under-responsive. She like didn't respond. It took them a long time to get the test done because she did just sit there for a lot of it, but they finally got her to respond to every wavelength and every sound. She didn't make any eye contact, and so we started once a week therapy at that point. With Tessie, the signs that she had autism, after those initial signs when I was already pretty confident, and obviously I probably would have missed those if I didn't have Maggie and I hadn't spent, a lot of the previous 3 years thinking about autism a lot. I think I probably would have missed a lot of the signs of autism with Tessie. But because I think that I saw a lot of the earlier signs with Tess. and because a lot of the earlier signs with Tess were really, really obvious. The other things we saw with her was as soon as she was mobile, at first it was just the avoiding eye contact, and she wasn't mobile. I mean, she just laid there for like 6 months, but then she became mobile. Once she became mobile, and she didn't really have a huge gross motor delay or anything, once she stopped sleeping all the time, once she got on her apnea monitor and it started going off, so she wasn't like not breathing for long periods at night, she started to become more active. And I don't know if that would have happened anyways, or if it was a coincidence, or if that actually related to the fact that the monitor was waking her up 10 times a night every time she stopped breathing. I'm not sure which was which. But anyways, around that time, she did start being awake a lot of the time instead of sleeping all the time. And she started actually becoming more mobile. And as soon as she could crawl, she started crawling away from us. And as soon as she could manage stairs, she taught herself how to do stairs. Then she would go to whatever part of the house we were not. If we were all in the living room, she would go downstairs to the playroom and be in the playroom in the dark by herself playing with toys. And if we came downstairs to be with her in the playroom, even if it was like one person, like Nanny comes downstairs to be with Tessie in the playroom, Tessie would then go upstairs and climb up 2 flights of stairs to go into a bedroom by herself and play by herself in a bedroom. That was probably the next year of her life, was her going and crawling away and then walking away and finding her own space and being by herself as much as she possibly could. So that was one of the probably big signs. Like Maggie, she has pretty good fine motor skills. I would say maybe even better than Maggie's. She loves stacking things. She loves fitting things into other things. She's constantly going around and finding different toys and fitting them together. She loves doing the shape sorters, and she's really, really good at them. She takes action figures and then she'll find other toys and like make different hats for her action figures with the other toys. Not quite like playing with the toys appropriately in that she's not acting with them, but she's definitely, I don't know, it's interesting to watch her play with her toys. She's always trying to find different ways to like fit them together and make them into these creations that she makes. Tessie's stims are twirling. She likes to twirl. She likes to watch things twirl, and she likes to twirl. That was probably her earliest one. From the time she was tiny, she was attracted to twirling things and twirling. And her mermaid pillow and nodding her head, or shaking her head, not nodding her head, shaking her head is one of hers. That was an early stim too. And again, with her, like her sister, I would say the number one sign was her enormous language delay, not having language really. She occasionally says words, but most of the time not really. Right now, occasionally she'll like say doll. She said doll like twice, but I was very excited by it. Mama, she does say mama. Sometimes she says da. And then go is her favorite word. For a 2.5-year-old, she doesn't have a lot of language. And the language that her outward language definitely doesn't match her mind and what's going on in her mind, since she can tell us what she wants pretty well with her PEX board. This morning she told me I want french fries with her PEX board for breakfast, and I had to tell her I'm sorry, I don't have french fries, and she like collapsed against her tray, didn't make a sound, just laid there like, oh, the world is so unfair. Like, sorry Tess. She'd already had cereal at that point, so I offered her graham cracker to take in the car. But I would say that the main difference between the girls is just their personalities, in that by the time Maggie was Tessie's age, she was already pretty anxious and just constant motion and she was constantly with me, constantly in motion, constantly in danger, constantly into things, and Tessie is sort of the opposite. Tessie is very, very calm, very, very quiet, very, very easy, which aren't usually words you associate with kids who are on the spectrum. She doesn't really get into trouble here. She's silly and sweet. She has definitely gotten more cuddly than she was originally. She still doesn't really like to be cuddled unless it's on her terms, like you let Tessie come to you and cuddle you, you don't cuddle Tessie is kind of the joke around here. But she definitely comes over and asks to be cuddled a lot more often now, and so that is really, really special for all of us. I think that I kept waiting for the frustration to set in with her, and I'm not sure if it hasn't because she does have more tools than Maggie had at the same age, or if she just has a more laid back personality. I think that it's a little bit of both. I think that naturally she is more laid back, and she also has been given more tools at a younger age to work with, so that she is less frustrated than her sister was at the same age. And I think it probably helps that we all have a lot more tools too, also helps with the frustration. Anyways, these are just some of the signs. These are just the signs that really we saw with our girls. I know that there are a lot of other signs, and that if another parent described their kid, it would probably sound entirely differently. Anyways, that is it for today. If you like this video, we'd love it if you would hit the thumbs up button. And if you're interested in all things autism, we would love it if you'd hit subscribe. And I'll see you tomorrow. Bye.